Think about the cruelest person you've ever encountered. Not the confident villain from movies, not the calculated psychopath, but the petty tyrant who made your life miserable over nothing. The boss who micromanaged your bathroom breaks. The bureaucrat who wielded their tiny authority like a weapon. The Discord moderator who banned you for the smallest infraction. The partner who needed to control every detail of your life. Here's what you probably noticed. They weren't powerful, they were terrified. The nastiest people are almost always the most insecure. And this isn't a coincidence, it's not irony. It's a psychological law that Friedrich Nietzsche decoded over a century ago. A law that explains why the weakest people become the cruelest tyrants, why insecurity doesn't create submission but domination, and why the person shouting loudest is usually the one most afraid. Nietzsche believed that when a person lacks inner power, they compensate by seeking outer power. Instead of strengthening themselves, they try to control the world around them. They enforce rules, demand obedience, and clamp down on others not because they are strong, but because they feel fundamentally threatened. Their authority becomes a shield hiding a frightened core. They aren't leading, they're reacting. They aren't commanding, they're defending. Their cruelty isn't confidence, it's panic dressed in armor. What you're about to discover is deeply uncomfortable. Because once you understand this pattern, you'll see it everywhere. In your workplace, in your relationships, in history, and possibly, most uncomfortably, in yourself. We expect power to come from strength. We imagine leaders as confident, self-assured, commanding. We think of tyrants as larger-than-life figures who dominate through sheer force of will. But look closer at the cruelest figures in history, and you'll find something else entirely. Joseph Stalin, brutal dictator who killed millions, was a short man with a withered arm and a face scarred by smallpox, who spent his entire life compensating for feeling inferior to the intellectuals around him. He murdered people who made him feel inadequate. The most vicious slave owners in the American South weren't the wealthy plantation aristocrats. They were often poor overseers, men with almost nothing, who brutalized enslaved people to feel superior to someone. Anyone. The boss everyone hates isn't the successful executive secure in their position. It's the middle manager terrified of being exposed, who makes everyone else miserable to prove they matter. The abusive partner isn't confident in the relationship. They're so terrified of abandonment that they try to control everything, because control is the only thing that makes them feel safe. To Nietzsche, the true danger was not the strong man who knows he is strong. It was the weak man who refuses to accept his weakness. Because once a person cannot tolerate their own sense of inadequacy, they stop trying to improve themselves and instead devote their energy to controlling others. Rather than conquering their inner chaos, they conquer the world outside. Their rage, their rules, their domination, these are not expressions of strength, but screams of internal collapse. They need the world to bow because they cannot stand upright within themselves, and this is why insecure rulers are always more brutal than confident ones. A secure leader can allow disagreement, creativity, even challenge, because none of it threatens their identity. But the insecure tyrant must crush every difference, silence every voice, and micromanage every detail. Not because they love control, but because without it, they fall apart. Their cruelty becomes a life support system for a fragile ego, an external fortress built to defend a collapsing inner world. This is the paradox Nietzsche identified. The people with the deepest insecurity often seek the most power. And when they get it, they use it most cruelly. Why? Because cruelty is weakness pretending to be strength. And Nietzsche understood exactly how this happens. Friedrich Nietzsche was obsessed with a question. Why do the weak resent the strong so intensely? Not just envy them, not just want what they have, but actively, passionately, viciously hate them. He called this phenomenon ressentiment, a French word he chose deliberately because the German equivalent wasn't strong enough. Ressentiment isn't just resentment. It's a toxic, festering hatred born from impotence. Here's his insight. When people feel powerless, they don't just accept it. They don't just work to become stronger. Instead, they create an entire moral system to justify their weakness and condemn strength. Nietzsche described this as slave morality, the morality of the powerless. In his framework, there are two types of moral systems. One, master morality. The strong define good as what they are: powerful, confident, creative, life-affirming. Bad is simply the absence of these qualities: weakness, passivity, mediocrity. 2. Slave morality. The weak can't compete with master morality, so they invert it. They declare that the qualities of the strong, confidence, power, ambition, are actually evil. Pride becomes sin. Strength becomes oppression. Success becomes exploitation. And weakness? Weakness becomes virtue. Suffering becomes noble. Victimhood becomes identity. But here's the crucial part. This moral inversion doesn't make the weak feel better. It makes them more bitter. Because deep down, they still crave the power they claim to despise. Ressentiment is what happens when you want power but can't obtain it honestly. When you crave strength but lack it. When you desire respect but haven't earned it. So you do something else. You get power through the back door. You become a tyrant. Not the grand tyrant of empires, those actually require competence. But the petty tyrant, the cruel bureaucrat, the vindictive boss, the controlling partner, the forum moderator drunk on tiny authority. These people found a shortcut to power: cruelty. Because cruelty doesn't require strength. It doesn't require confidence. It doesn't require competence. It only requires opportunity and willingness to inflict pain. And the insecure, they're very willing. Because every act of cruelty temporarily soothes their screaming insecurity. Nietzsche argued that all living things share a fundamental drive: the will to power. This isn't about political power or domination in the simple sense. It's about the drive to grow, to overcome obstacles, to become more than you are. It's the drive toward mastery, toward excellence, toward self-overcoming. In healthy people, the will to power drives creation. They want to build, achieve, create master skills, and overcome challenges. They want to become powerful through actual power: competence, knowledge, strength, wisdom. But in insecure people, the will to power gets twisted, corrupted, poisoned by ressentiment. They still crave power. That drive is ineradicable. But they can't or won't pursue it through the hard path of actual growth. So they pursue it through domination. Here's the distinction that matters. Real power is the ability to create, to influence, to accomplish. It comes from competence, wisdom, and strength. It doesn't need to prove itself constantly because it's self-evident. Control, on the other hand, is the desperate attempt to manufacture the feeling of power by limiting others. It comes from insecurity and requires constant enforcement because it's artificial. Secure people seek power through growth. Insecure people seek power through control. And control requires cruelty because people naturally resist being controlled. So you must force them, intimidate them, break them, make them afraid. This creates a vicious cycle. Insecurity. Person feels inadequate, powerless, inferior. Craving will to power demands they feel significant somehow. Shortcut. They seek control over others instead of mastery of self. Opportunity. They find some position of minor authority. Cruelty. They use that authority to dominate and humiliate. Temporary relief. Cruelty makes them feel powerful for a moment. Deeper insecurity. But they know it's fake power, so insecurity worsens. More cruelty. They must escalate to maintain the illusion. This is why petty tyrants can never stop. Why they always escalate. Why they can never be satisfied. Because they're not actually becoming more powerful. They're just temporarily drowning out the voice inside that tells them they're weak. Let's get specific. How do you recognize this pattern? What does insecure tyranny actually look like? Here are the 7 signs of the insecure tyrant. 1. Disproportionate reactions to small threats. The insecure tyrant loses their mind over minor challenges to their authority. Question their decision? You've declared war. Forget to CC them on an email? You're undermining them. Have expertise they lack? You're threatening them. Secure leaders can handle disagreement because they're confident in their competence. Insecure tyrants can't handle any challenge because their entire sense of self depends on never being questioned. 2. Obsession with symbols of authority. They need constant visible proof that they matter. Fancy titles, special parking spots, people standing when they enter. Formal deference even in casual situations. Why? Because they don't feel authoritative inside, so they need external symbols to remind everyone and themselves of their position. Real authority doesn't need symbols. It just exists. 3. Cruelty toward the vulnerable. Notice who the insecure tyrant targets. People who can't fight back. The junior employee, not the senior executive. The new student, not the tenured professor. The isolated individual, not the person with allies. The powerless, never the powerful, because they're not actually brave. They're cowards who found victims. 4. Taking credit, deflecting blame. Everything good that happens, they did it. Everything bad, someone else did it. This isn't just ego, it's insecurity. They're so terrified of being seen as inadequate that they can't admit any mistake, can't share any success. Their fragile sense of self can't handle the truth, that they're ordinary, fallible humans like everyone else. 5. Information hoarding. They gatekeep knowledge obsessively. They don't share information. They keep everyone slightly in the dark. Why? Because information is power, and if people knew what the tyrant knows, they'd realize the tyrant isn't special, isn't necessary, could be replaced. 6. Manufactured loyalty tests. They create situations where people must prove loyalty, often through humiliation. Jump through this pointless hoop. Do this degrading task. Laugh at my joke even though it's not funny. It's not about the task. It's about forcing submission, because submission is the only thing that makes them feel powerful. 7. They target confident people. Here's the pattern people miss. Insecure tyrants are especially cruel to confident, competent people. Why? Because confident people are a mirror showing the tyrant what they're not. Every interaction with someone genuinely secure in themselves reminds the insecure tyrant of their own inadequacy. So they try to break that confidence. Make the competent person doubt themselves, drag them down. Because misery loves company, but insecurity demands it. Let's look at how this pattern plays out on the grand stage of history. Because the same psychology that creates the cruel boss also creates the brutal dictator. Joseph Stalin, the paranoid purger. Stalin is the perfect case study in insecure tyranny. Born poor in Georgia, physically marked by smallpox scars and a withered arm from a childhood accident. He was shorter than average, spoke Russian with a thick accent, and lacked the intellectual sophistication of the other Bolshevik leaders. Lenin, Trotsky, Bukharin, these were educated cosmopolitan intellectuals. Stalin was a crude thug who felt inferior around them. So what did he do once he gained power? He murdered them, all of them, but not just them. He purged millions, and the pattern of who he killed reveals his insecurity. Intellectuals, artists, anyone who might make him feel inadequate. Entire populations who might threaten his control. He couldn't compete intellectually, so he competed with terror. He couldn't earn genuine respect, so he demanded absolute submission. Classic insecure tyranny, scaled to industrial proportions. Hitler, the failed artist's revenge. Adolf Hitler failed as an artist, rejected from art school, lived in homeless shelters, felt humiliated by his failures. Then he found a shortcut to feeling significant, blaming others. The Jews, the Marxists, the liberals, they were why he failed. Not his lack of talent, not his mediocrity. This is ressentiment perfected. and once he gained power, he channeled his personal inadequacy into genocide. His speeches were filled with language of humiliation and revenge. Germany was humiliated by Versailles. Germans were victims, and now they would dominate. Notice the pattern: personal insecurity, victimhood narrative, demand for domination, industrialized cruelty. Nero, the emperor who needed applause. The Roman emperor. Nero is fascinating because his tyranny was explicitly about needing validation. He fancied himself an artist, a musician, poet, actor, but he was mediocre. And as emperor, he couldn't handle anyone saying so. So he forced audiences to watch his performances, made it illegal to leave during his concerts, which sometimes lasted hours. Executed critics. He also murdered his mother, his wife, and countless senators, anyone who made him feel inadequate or threatened his position. Why? Because his power was real, but his sense of self was hollow, so he filled it with cruelty and forced admiration. What do these figures share? 1. Deep personal insecurity or humiliation. 2. Inability to achieve power through genuine competence. 3. Use of cruelty to maintain dominance. 4. Paranoia about challenges to authority. 5. Escalating violence to drown out internal doubt. 6. Targeting anyone who reminds them of their inadequacy. It's the same pattern whether you're running an empire or a department meeting. Only the scale changes. Let's bring this to where you actually encounter it. Your everyday life. The micromanaging boss. You know this person. They need to approve every email, monitor every bathroom break, question every decision. They'll say it's about maintaining standards or ensuring quality. But watch closer. They're terrified. Terrified you'll do something well without them and prove they're not necessary. Terrified you'll make a mistake that reflects on them. Terrified of losing the tiny island of control that makes them feel significant. They're not managing. They're controlling. And control is all they have because competence is something they lack. The HOA Tyrant Homeowners Associations are laboratories for insecure tyranny. These are people with no other sphere of influence who suddenly have tiny authority over their neighbors. And what do? They wield it ruthlessly. Your grass is a half-inch too tall? Fine. Your mailbox is the wrong shade of beige? Warning, you parked your car at the wrong angle? Penalty. Why such disproportionate enforcement of trivial rules? Because enforcing those rules is the only time they feel powerful. The only time people have to listen to them. It's pathetic, and it's Nietzsche's ressentiment in action. The forum moderator online communities reveal this pattern perfectly because the power is entirely symbolic. The moderator has no real-world authority, no actual power, just the ability to ban people from an internet forum. And some moderators use that authority with shocking cruelty, banning people for tiny infractions, interpreting rules in the most uncharitable way, creating Byzantine regulations that nobody can follow. Why? Because it's the only power they have, and they're desperately, pathetically grateful for it. The controlling partner. This is where insecure tyranny gets truly dark. The partner who always needs to know where you are, who checks your phone, who isolates you from friends, who makes every decision, who punishes you with silence or rage for tiny perceived infractions. They'll say it's love, that they just care so much, that you made them jealous, that you should have known better, but it's not love, it's terror. They're so insecure about their worth that they need to control you completely, because if you had freedom, you might realize you could leave, and that possibility is unbearable to them. So they build a cage and call it commitment. Notice the commonalities. They all have limited artificial power rather than genuine competence. They all target people who can't easily escape. Employees, neighbors, community members, partners. They all justify cruelty as necessary, maintaining standards, keeping order, protecting the community. They all escalate over time as victims adapt, and they need more control. They all claim they're the real victim when challenged. This is insecure tyranny in the modern world. It doesn't wear a military uniform, it wears business casual and speaks the language of procedure. Let's get to the deep psychology. Why does this connection exist? Why does insecurity specifically lead to cruelty? 1. The mechanism of overcompensation. Psychology has a term for this: overcompensation. When someone feels inadequate in one area, they often overcompensate in another. The person insecure about their intelligence becomes aggressively intellectual. The person insecure about their masculinity becomes hypermasculine. The person insecure about their worth becomes cruel. But here's what Nietzsche added to this. Overcompensation isn't just about hiding weakness. It's about trying to kill the part of yourself that feels weak by killing it in others. When the insecure tyrant humiliates someone else, they're trying to destroy their own sense of inadequacy by projecting it outward. I'm not the weak one, you are. But it never works, because you can't kill your insecurity by inflicting it on others. You can only create more suffering while your insecurity grows. 2. Narcissistic injury. Modern psychology calls this narcissistic injury. When someone's fragile self-image is threatened, they react with disproportionate rage. Nietzsche described the same thing over a century earlier. The person built on ressentiment has a self-image that's entirely artificial. It's not based on genuine achievement or real strength. It's based on the story they tell themselves about why they're actually superior despite all evidence to the contrary. So any challenge to that story is catastrophic. A simple disagreement becomes an existential threat. A mild criticism becomes a declaration of war. And they respond with cruelty because cruelty is the only tool they have to protect their fragile sense of self. 3. The addiction to control. Here's what makes it worse. Cruelty becomes addictive. When the insecure person exercises cruelty and sees someone submit, suffer, or fear them, they get a hit of something they desperately crave. The feeling of power. It's not real power, but it feels real in the moment. And like any addiction, they need increasing doses to get the same effect. This is why petty tyrants always escalate, why the controlling partner become more controlling, why the cruel boss become crueler. They're chasing a feeling that can never satisfy them because it's based on making others smaller rather than making themselves larger. 4. The impossible equation. The insecure tyrant is trying to solve an impossible equation. They want to feel powerful, but they're not willing to do the work of becoming powerful. They want to feel superior, but they're not willing to develop actual superiority. They want respect, but they're not willing to become respectable. So they try to extract these things by force. And force doesn't create genuine power, superiority, or respect. It only creates fear and hatred, which makes them more insecure, which makes them more cruel, which makes them more insecure. It's a death spiral. 5. Why they can't stop. This is the tragedy. Nietzsche identified. The person trapped in ressentiment can't escape it. To escape, they would have to admit their weakness, face their inadequacy, do the hard work of actual growth, but that's precisely what they can't do. Because their entire psychological structure is built on denying weakness and projecting it outward, so they're trapped, condemned to infinite cruelty that never makes them feel better, only worse, creating suffering that echoes back as more insecurity. Hell isn't other people, as Sartre said. Hell is being an insecure tyrant, forever needing more power, forever finding it inadequate, forever making others suffer for your own inability to face yourself. So, what do you do? How do you deal with the insecure tyrant in your life? First, recognize the pattern. Stop taking their cruelty personally. It's not about you. When someone exercises disproportionate cruelty over minor things, they're telling you about their insecurity, not your inadequacy. The boss who explodes over a tiny mistake, they're terrified of being exposed as incompetent. The partner who needs to control everything, they're terrified of abandonment. The bureaucrat who enforces every rule, they're terrified of being powerless. Understanding this doesn't excuse their behavior, but it does free you from internalizing it. Second, don't play the game. Insecure tyrants want you to submit, to show fear, to prove their power is real. Don't give them that satisfaction. This doesn't mean open rebellion. That often makes things worse. But it means refusing to let their cruelty define your self-worth. Stay calm, stay professional, document everything, but don't let them make you feel small. Because the moment you internalize their projection of weakness onto you, they win. Third, strategic exit. Here's the hard truth. You often can't fix insecure tyrants. They have to want to change, and their entire psychology is built on avoiding self-examination. So sometimes the best response is exit. Leave the job, end the relationship, move from the neighborhood, leave the online community. This isn't a weakness, it's wisdom. Nietzsche himself said, "He who fights with monsters should be careful lest he thereby become a monster." Don't let their toxicity poison you. Preserve yourself. Leave. Fourth, if you can't leave, strategic submission. Sometimes you can't leave. You need the job. You're stuck in the lease. You have kids together. Then you play a different game. Strategic submission. Give them the surface appearance of deference while maintaining your inner autonomy. Comply with their demands when it doesn't matter. Save your resistance for things that truly matter. This is actually Machiavellian wisdom applied defensively. Appear to be what they need you to be while preserving your true self underneath. It's exhausting, it's demeaning, but sometimes it's necessary for survival. Fifth, build alternative power. The best response to an insecure tyrant is to become genuinely powerful in ways they can't touch. Develop skills. Build relationships outside their control. Create opportunities for yourself. Become financially independent. Grow your network. Real power is the best defense against fake power. And once you have it, their tyranny over you ends. Sixth, compassion without submission. This is the hardest part, recognizing that insecure tyrants are suffering. They're not happy, they're miserable. Their cruelty doesn't make them feel good, it makes them feel worse. They're trapped in a psychological prison of their own making. You can have compassion for that suffering while absolutely refusing to be its victim. Compassion doesn't mean accepting abuse. It means understanding why the abuse happens while protecting yourself from it. Nietzsche's ultimate wisdom was this: become strong enough that you no longer need to dominate others. Become secure enough that cruelty becomes unnecessary. The opposite of the insecure tyrant isn't the submissive victim. It's the person so secure in themselves that they don't need to prove anything to anyone. Let's go deeper into what Nietzsche really understood. Cruelty is always weakness. This is the core insight. Genuine strength doesn't need cruelty. The strong can afford to be kind because they're not threatened by others. They can afford to be generous because they're not competing desperately for scraps. They can afford to let others shine because someone else's light doesn't diminish their own. Cruelty is always, always a confession of inadequacy. When someone needs to hurt you to feel powerful, they're telling you they don't actually feel powerful. When someone needs to control you to feel secure, they're telling you they don't actually feel secure. This doesn't make their cruelty acceptable, but it does reveal its true nature: weakness pretending to be strength. The trap of revenge. Here's where people make a mistake. They want revenge on their tyrant. They want the boss to get fired, the abusive partner to suffer, the dictator to face justice. And these things might be good and necessary, but if you pursue revenge from a place of ressentiment, from your own wounded insecurity, you become what you hate. Nietzsche warned, "The abyss gazes also into you." The moment you derive your sense of power from making your former tyrant suffer, you've adopted their psychology. You've become the insecure tyrant you despised. Justice is fine, protection is necessary, but revenge rooted in your own insecurity? That's just the cycle continuing. True power. Nietzsche's ultimate vision was the Übermensch, the overman, the person who has transcended ressentiment. This isn't about becoming dominant. It's about becoming so secure in yourself that the opinions, approval, or submission of others becomes irrelevant to your sense of worth. The truly powerful person doesn't need others to be weak. They can afford to help others become strong because it doesn't threaten them. The truly secure person doesn't need others to fail. They can afford to celebrate others' success because it doesn't diminish them. This is the opposite of insecure tyranny, and it's the only real escape from the cycle. The question you must ask yourself. Here's the uncomfortable part. We all have insecurity. We all have moments where we're tempted to exercise petty cruelty to feel better. The question isn't whether you feel insecure, it's what you do with that insecurity. Do you face it? Acknowledge it? Work to grow beyond it? Or do you project it? Deny it? Try to drown it in the suffering of others? Every time you're tempted to be cruel, to someone beneath you in status, to someone who can't fight back, to someone who challenged your authority, ask yourself, is this strength or is this insecurity? Am I doing this because it's necessary or because it makes me feel powerful? Am I becoming the tyrant I hate? We've traveled from Nietzsche's philosophy to history's cruelest figures to your workplace and relationships. And everywhere the same pattern emerges. Insecurity seeks power through shortcuts. Those shortcuts always involve cruelty. And that cruelty never actually resolves the insecurity. It only feeds it. This pattern has repeated for all of human history. It will continue repeating. Because as long as humans feel inadequate, they will be tempted to compensate through domination. But Nietzsche offered us a way out. Not through political reform or social change, though those might help, but through individual transformation. Stop seeking power over others. Start seeking power over yourself. Stop trying to prove your worth through others' submission. Start proving your worth through your own growth. Stop making others small to feel big. Start becoming genuinely big so their size becomes irrelevant. The cruelest tyrants are always the most insecure, but you don't have to be either. You can break the cycle. You can choose strength over cruelty, security over control, growth over domination. Nietzsche knew this 140 years ago. The question is, do you? The next time you encounter cruelty, whether you're experiencing it or tempted to inflict it, remember what it really is. Not strength, not power, not justice. Just weakness wearing a crown. Just insecurity, wielding a sword. Just suffering creating more suffering. And you? You can choose to be something else entirely.